It is crazy when you think about like the president talking about 51st state and stuff. Then you see these man on the street interviews, and these people who had literally no beef at all, loved Canada last week, are
Hmm.
like talking like, "Yeah, let's take him over, fuck him." Right? It's like, what on earth is happening just because this one dude brain farts this shit? It's insane. It's insane.
So yeah, without even getting into the nonsense of all that,
Yeah.
and in Canada or whatever. I mean, obviously, if any other president had said anything like this, they'd be fitted for a straight jacket. But he gets to play by his own set of rules for whatever reason. So
Yeah.
I could rant about that all day. But as far as like the impacts, I think maybe we should talk about
Yes, please.
what it means for the Canadian economy. And there, it really like tariffs can affect an economy. There's sort of two paths. One path is if Canada didn't retaliate. So if we didn't put our own tariff on US imports into Canada, then the impacts are serious. They're just maybe less severe. There's debate about some of these things, but obviously our exports would take a pretty big hit. If they're 25% more expensive now, US businesses might look for substitutes domestically. That means we're selling a lot less into the United States. The impacts on inflation without retaliation, this is where there's some debate. Without us retaliating, the impact on growth would overwhelm everything else and we would get much lower inflation. Bank of Canada would have to respond pretty aggressively in that scenario, and we'd get an exchange rate depreciate in our models to like 66 cents. So fun for anyone that's still thinking about traveling to the United States. That's not the path we're choosing. We have chosen to retaliate with a 25% tariff on about 50% of US imports into Canada. So there will be at least some inflationary response. So in this with retaliation scenario, you still take the same hit to GDP, but then the impact on inflation and the Bank of Canada is what really kind of matters. So, and that branches off again. So under one scenario, you might have like a transitory shock to inflation. No one wants to talk about transitory inflation anymore after the pandemic, but a one-time increase in prices due to the tariff on US imports that kind of goes away after about a year. Under that scenario, I think the Bank of Canada can act pretty aggressively to address the economy and the weakness in the economy. And I think they would end up cutting rates by 100 basis points, 125 basis points, whatever it is. You kind of look at like the Bank of Canada's most recent projections. They started out very severe and have since scaled back. I think, what started off as like 3 points of economic growth lower than would be otherwise. And now it's like a little bit lower than that in their most recent projections. So they have 1,000 people working on this and everyone else has like a handful. So go with their numbers in most cases. In the case where you have transitory inflation, I think the Bank of Canada can lower rates. Maybe they lower to between 1 and 1.5%. They probably don't go all the way to the zero lower bound. The situation that we might end up with is like a low but persistent higher inflation. So in Tiff Macklem's most recent speech, he had some projections for the impact on inflation, like sort of, current most likely proposal for tariffs and retaliation. And it shows like about 0.5% to 0.6% increase in inflation over baseline, which is like 2% target. So they show inflation running at between like 2.5 and 2.6 for like 3 years. So like pretty persistently higher than target, like not much higher. We're not above 3%, but higher than target inflation for a really extended period of time. Obviously, they don't show what their monetary policy response would be. So I did some work to just sort of try and match that specific response in our models. It kind of tells you that they would probably not be able to lower rates at all under that scenario. If inflation is just running 2.5, 2.6%, it seems like they would not be able to cut rates very aggressively or maybe at all. And in that case, mortgage rates don't move very much either. Maybe even you have a little bit of a risk premium built in because the economy is a little shakier. So you might end up with 5-year fixed rates going a little bit higher. And that seems to be their most likely scenario. We have a much weaker economy, an economy that's in their estimates, I think, very shallow recession to just zero growth for a 2-year period, and where rates are kind of hovering around where they are now. So you get all that weakness and not necessarily a lot of firepower directed at pulling us out of that. And they've kind of taken great pains even to explain, monetary policy can't fix everything in the economy. And would be like kind of a structural, like if all of a sudden our largest trading partners trying to trade with us a lot less, that's not really a job for monetary policy to fix. And they're trying to communicate that, I think, as well. So under that scenario, obviously the housing market would be impacted if you've got certain parts of the economy, certain regions that are being more affected. Sales are falling. In our models, they fall back to basically the weakness we've seen in the past 2 years. So sales are running pretty slow. Prices coming down, inventory starting to build up. Not an awesome scenario. It's not like a doomsday kind of scenario, but it certainly would mean another year or two of really slow sales, especially if interest rates can't come down.